6 weeks before the start of the 2018 NBA draft, the Phoenix Suns had already won the lottery, and on top of that, they had just hired Igor Kokoskov to be their new head coach. Now, before the 2017-2018 college season, many expected Michael Porter Jr. to go with the first overall pick in the draft. That was until he had a back injury just minutes into his opening debut at Missouri, and because of that, while he would try to play through it, it was too much and he would have to get a back surgery, and while it was minimally invasive, he's a 19-year-old kid, and that is not a good look for any draft prospect. So when news broke out, many NBA scouting departments were terrified of even looking at the prospect of Michael Porter Jr., and because of that, many were uncertain of who exactly the Suns would take. Would they take the local hometown kid from the Bahamas, who is a physical freak at center, who went off at Arizona for 20 and 10 a game, or would they go with the prodigy, as some would call him, from overseas, who had been playing professionally since the age of 16 and had shown a huge bag of a combination of playmaking and shot creating. He had become the youngest EuroLeague MVP ever, and on top of that, he was the most gifted player in this draft in terms of skill set. Now, people were a lot less certain about the kid from overseas because he had a lack of athleticism just because he didn't have a high vertical. I should also mention there were some concerns about him in terms of his shooting consistency and some of his defensive intangibles overseas. Quite honestly, most people are too lazy to actually go back and watch his tape, and because of that, they just went along with the status quo. I am too young to be calling these two kids because they're very big grown men. That came off very bizarre. You know I'm talking about Deandre Ayton from Arizona and Luka Doncic from the EuroLeague. The third of these studs was Marvin Bagley, who was amazing in high school at Sierra Canyon, and he was also a hometown kid from Phoenix, Arizona. Bagley was a star at Duke, where he averaged 21 and 11 a game on 64% true shooting, and on top of that, he showed the ability to space the floor while being an elite level rebounder. Now, the consensus for many people would be that Deandre Ayton would go first in the draft. However, many understood how good Marvin Bagley and Luka Doncic were and how good they could be. There were other prospects whose names were being thrown around the top three, like Mo Bamba and Jaren Jackson Jr. Bamba, a center from Texas, and Jaren Jackson Jr., a stretch big from Michigan State, didn't have the numbers or the accolades that the main three prospects had, but they did have untapped potential. Bamba was a physical specimen with the potential to be a freak-level rim protector and also possess the ability to space the floor. Meanwhile, Jaren Jackson Jr. showed elite-level rim protection while also showing the ability to be a quality floor spacing four. Both these players show that if fully developed, and more importantly, properly developed, they could be the best player out of this entire draft. Then, weeks before the draft, actually on my birthday as a matter of fact, I know you don't care, but I do, Deandre Ayton, after his pre-draft workout for the Suns, told reporters he knew he would be going first overall in the draft. Despite that though, many still believed there was a good chance the Suns would draft Luka, given he was the youngest EuroLeague MVP at just 19 years old, where he had been playing professionally against grown men and dominating them. And many who had seen a ton of Luka Doncic in Europe went as far to say that he was actually a basketball prodigy. Now, you don't hear that term being thrown around too often unless it's with Julian Newman. Sorry, bro. Draft night felt similarly to the way it did this year in 2020, with most fans recognizing LaMelo Ball could go first to the Timberwolves the same way that many people recognize the fact that Luka Doncic could easily be a Phoenix Sun. But many felt that Anthony Edwards this year would go first in the draft, the same way many anticipated DeAndre Ayton to be selected with the first overall pick in 2018. Now, on June 21st, the Suns did end up going with DeAndre Ayton, the hometown kid since he moved to the United States in the Bahamas at just 12 years old. Following that selection, they would pair a few assets to acquire the 10th overall pick, Mikal Bridges, who was the best 3-and-D wing in the entire draft. Now, DeAndre confirmed what we already knew in his rookie year, and while he did have some games where he found himself too aggressive leading to foul trouble, it wasn't too consistent of an issue, so through the first month of the year, he averaged 16 points per game and 10 rebounds. However, Luka Doncic as a shooting guard, which wasn't his natural position, was averaging 20 points per game, 5 assists, and 6 rebounds. Very early, Luka made it clear he was the Mavericks' best player, and while starting in a lineup alongside Dennis Smith Jr., he didn't have as many opportunities as he should have had to create for himself and his teammates. But when he did have the ball in his hands, he had a calm energy to him, playing at his own pace in a James Harden echelon way. In this stretch of games, the Mavs were not winning much. However, Luka showed poise in late game situations, which kept the Mavs both competitive and exciting for fans. But for the Suns, they started the year getting blown out more often than not. Because of that, people didn't notice what DeAndre was doing in Phoenix, and they shifted their attention to Luka Doncic in Dallas and a little bit of Trae Young in Atlanta. But then on January 31st, the Mavericks Mavericks traded Luka's backcourt partner DSJ to the Knicks in the Kristaps Porzingis blockbuster deal. DSJ has never been a good enough shooter to play the shooting guard position, and because of that, Luka found himself playing off-ball more often than not. So the Mavericks, in an attempt to fully utilize Luka Doncic, trade away the one player holding him back to get the most out of him. So while Porzingis was recovering from his torn ACL, Luka was given the keys to the offense where he took his game to a higher level of many breakout games. He was playing out of his mind. Now the Mavericks would win in 33 games, but on the other hand, the Suns just won 19. Now for DeAndre Ayton, as the year went on, it was more of the same. He put up a very solid 16 and 10 a game for a rookie center. However, that was mightily shadowed by Luka Doncic in Dallas and Trae Young in Atlanta. It was incredibly disappointing for the Suns, and by the end of the year, the vast majority agreed. The Phoenix Suns had already missed out on a future MVP type player and the face of the league for many years to come. That 2019 Suns team could have actually won games, but they had no point guard. D-Book was playing both point guard and shooting guard as a solution, and somehow he was succeeding at it, but Luka would have solved their hole immediately at point guard, and on top of that, he would have been the solution for them long term. The match between Book and Luka would have made each other better right away, sharing the offensive load together while setting each other up in the process. Now, it was still early, but Luka averaged 21, 8 and 6 a game on 58% true shooting as a point guard. DeAndre again put up 16 and 10 while being 58% from the field. Luka would go on to win Rookie of the Year, and Ayton would come in third behind Atlanta's Trae Young. So at the start of the 2019-20 season, many were excited to see how these two would build off their rookie campaigns. But the day following the Suns season opener, DeAndre Ayton would test positive for a PED test, and because of that, he would be suspended for the next 25 games. During the stretch, Luka took his game to a completely different level from his rookie year, similarly to how he did at the end of the season, except he was even better at developing more as a playmaker and a creator. Luka's usage rate was through the ceiling, but he backed it up with incredible numbers. The Mavericks, by the end of the year, would break the record for the highest offensive rating in NBA history. Now, when DeAndre Ayton would come back, there were stretches of him putting up monstrous games, but there was an issue. When watching Sun games, you could tell there was a lack of consistent aggressiveness from DeAndre, and because of that, it not only led to his impact when the Suns taking a hit, but it also really hurt his numbers. By the end of the season, Luka would finish 4th in the MVP voting with 29, 9 and 9 on the season on 59% true shooting. Now, in the 38 games that DeAndre played in the regular season, he would put up 18 and 12. Going into the season, following the shortest NBA offseason for most teams, DeAndre has already shown a good amount of improvement defensively as well as when it comes to his shooting. However, DeAndre hasn't been the Suns' 3rd best player this year after CP3 and Devin Booker. He's been their 4th best player. Mikal Bridges this year has really developed as more than just a 3-and-D guy. He's been putting up an incredibly efficient 14 points per game while being one of the league's top defenders. And now you can really point this toward Mikal Bridges being great this year and really developing a lot more than many expected, but Mikal is a player taken 2nd by the Suns in the draft. So for him to outplay their 1st overall pick raises eyebrows at former GM Brian McDonough. Now, if you don't know who that is, he was the one who drafted DeAndre Ayton, and he was the head of the old Suns regime before they fired him and would bring in James Jones. Now, this was incredibly early into DeAndre's rookie season, so did this have anything to do with DeAndre's selection? Who knows? It was probably more to do with him drafting Alex Len in the top 5 as soon as he came in 2013. Now, to be fair, he did redeem himself by selecting TJ Warren and then Devin Booker, but he threw all credibility when it comes to drafting out the window. Once he drafted Dragan Bender, Marquise Chris, and Josh Jackson inside the top 10 over players at positions of need like De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, and Jamal Murray, and who knows, with Luka having his former coach, maybe he would have been even better in Phoenix, and Igor Kokoskov would be looked at as a genius, and that would mean that Monty Williams wouldn't be the Suns coach right now, and he is a big reason for why they've been building such a strong winning culture. And I understand between these two who the better selection would have been, but DeAndre's still been an impactful player for the Suns. He's a great rebounder, and when aggressive, he is a tough cover, and I think he easily has the potential to be a top 5 center in just a couple of years if he could put that aggressiveness together. But in hindsight, the Suns had 1, the opportunity to select a once-in-a-generation type talent, 2, a player at a position they badly needed, and 3, a player who would have made life much easier for their franchise player years earlier. So by choice, the Suns missed out on Luka Doncic for the same reason that they made many other mistakes in the past. Their regime was in chaos at the top, and because of that, they were incapable of making a huge decision that would have changed the franchise in the future and the landscape of the NBA as a whole. So it makes us wonder, what if the Suns went with their newly hired coach's former player in June 2018 rather than DeAndre Ayton? So let me know in the comments down below what the craziest change in NBA landscape would have been if Luka Doncic was selected 1st overall in the 2018 NBA draft.